Today in the lab we're going to be working on restoring this Mitsumi Amiga 500 keyboard. This keyboard belongs to my revision 6 Amiga 500 and it's the one that I'm putting in a new case with new black keycaps from a1200.net. In a previous episode I discovered that not all the keys on this keyboard still worked. And the only thing that I've found is that a couple keys no longer work on the keyboard. And I narrowed it down to 2 specific keys not working, and then one that was kind of flaky. So in order to fix this, I'm going to have to disassemble the keyboard, potentially replace some of the plungers, and then reassemble everything. Now I've worked on big box Amiga Mitsumi keyboards before, and this Amiga 500 keyboard should be relatively similar. However, instead of a PCB for all the contacts for the keys, there's going to be a membrane inside. And that membrane is going to be much more delicate. So there's a significant chance when you open these up, if you're not careful, that you could destroy that membrane. It's a very delicate component. Anyhow, first thing to do is to get all the old keycaps off of here so that we can start taking this thing apart. Removing these keys can sometimes be a little tricky because these have springs underneath them, at least the earlier revision 6s did. The later models would have little rubber spring cups underneath them. But I find that these springs tend to go everywhere. They tend to have a lot of potential energy built up and just pop off, so it's a little tricky. Alright, so I have everything removed except for a lot of these long keys, these bigger keys. The reason why I'm doing these last, and we'll consequently try and put these on first, is that these all have stabilization bars under them, so they're a little tricky to get out. I'll post a link to my other video where I work on Mitsumi keyboards a bit, and that'll explain, some ways of how to get these in and out. Generally speaking, these go off last and they get put on first. That's my general MO. Now this keyboard here, and maybe a little hard to tell, is kind of bent. It's not quite straight. In fact, I think on this side you can see it much better. There's like a bow here. It's not fully straight. I don't know what caused that in the past. But like I say, this is fairly similar to the other Mitsumi keyboards. The big difference is that it's on this metal frame, right? Which the big box keyboards don't have. And instead of a PCB underneath here, we're going to find a membrane, right? So a really thin, flexible membrane. And then the electronic circuitry is actually on a PCB up here. that connects to the membrane down here. Otherwise, it's very similar, like I say, in construction. So first off, let's take off all those screws on the bottom and just see what we're working with here. So we have a plastic sheet here, and then 3 screws on top of the plastic sheet, and then this screw is underneath. And then there's a bunch of really small screws all throughout this back plate here. This top board was held in place also by this zip tie, this black zip tie, that seems to hold together the metal frame, this PCB, and the protective plastic sheet here. So I had to cut that. And here we have the membrane and the top key holder detached from one another. You can see how it's just a delicate little film. Now, I was expecting this to be exactly the same, and this may be a little hard to see, but on this black key holder it says A500. This is actually a different part than what's in the big box ones. And the big box ones, they all have this same big black holder piece here that holds all the plungers, but it's labeled as A2000 instead. I've also figured out why my F2 key was stuck. Pull this out of here. Whoops. There was this piece of something down in there that was preventing the plunger from actually going all the way down. So that explains that one. But the other ones don't have anything like that. The enter key and the tab key. So we'll have to maybe clean things a little bit. And I'm thinking while I have this apart, it's probably worthwhile to clean things anyhow. You know, now that I have it apart, might as well. Alright, so since I have this apart, I'm going to go ahead and wash this black part. Normal procedure, hot and soapy water. It's not so dirty, but since I've got it apart, I might as well wash it. Also, the metal parts will give a little bath in WD-40 just to get off any residual grease or gunk. And I've separated what I think are the 2 bad plungers, or the ones for keys that don't work. Sometimes they're not really bad, it's just they don't mate up correctly with the pads that they have anymore, and that's just, you know, age and wear. And so sometimes rotating them around helps a lot. So I've hit this with a little bit of canned air to get off a lot of the dust and all of that. But I'm not going to do any more cleaning, because this membrane, compare and contrast to the actual physical PCB, very delicate. And in fact, if you were to clean this with IPA, it would remove some protective covering from some of the traces here. And even if you wash it with soap and water, I think some of that will come off. It's a very delicate piece, and I don't really want to mess with it that much. It is possible to clean the contact pads with a bit of IPA, but the ones that I'm having trouble with, and actually most of these on here, look very good. They look very clean. So I'm hesitant to do anything with them, you know. And I think rather I'm going to clean the plungers and maybe swap out some plungers after I get the black piece all cleaned and dried, and we will see how that goes. Hopefully that fixes my issues with those 2 keys, and there's not something like a dead trace here. There is some darker areas here, but looking at those closely, those tend to be the areas where there's holes between the black key holder and the membrane. So that's where kind of dust and grime get in, and so I think there's a thin layer of dust over those traces. But I'm worried that cleaning them will make the situation worse, so I'm not going to. So it's now been a couple weeks, so I'm pretty sure that the black key holder here is completely bone dry. And we're going to start to reassemble this. Now, I've separated out the plungers from the 2 keys that were bad. And so we put those kind of over on the numeric keypad where they're not used as much. I kind of suspect that they're fine, and just shuffling around the plungers will do a lot of good here. But we'll see what happens. We'll get this all back assembled and test it again. Alright, so I've got all these back in. Really painstaking process. And once you get them centered, they're fine, but they are kind of finicky. And what you want to look for is when you can lift them up that they all kind of move in tandem like this. You can see one of these here, this one's not quite with the rest of the band, so it needs to be adjusted a little bit. So I've got all these back in, and I've also got in the LED here. Just zoom in on, because this is removable, although a lot of times that little LED right there is stuck in place from years of being where it is. It's also right next to the special caps lock plunger, which is different from the rest of them. So let's flip this over and put it on the membrane, get this starting to back together, and we'll test it. So when I was putting this back together, I didn't put in all the screws, just a few of them, just enough to make sure that everything was aligned and was sticking together, but not all of them. And that's just because, well, I didn't know if it was going to work yet, so why screw in everything? That's just more work for me. Got the keyboard mostly back together. I didn't put in all of the screws because I wanted to see if things would be mostly working first and that I hadn't completely messed this up. And I'm starting to put in my new keycaps here. However, I still have keys that aren't working correctly. And they're some of what I expected. So the number pad ones, I moved some plungers that weren't working from one place to another. That indicates that the plungers might be bad. And then some other ones are new or potentially new, which may indicate that the membrane is either dirty or damaged, or just from age that some don't mate up correctly anymore. And what I found when I've done this with big box Amigas is a lot of times they come back together perfectly, and sometimes they require a little bit of fiddling like this. And so I've been kind of testing these keys one by one with Amiga Test Kit. And generally, even with the keycap off, they should be very responsive and very sensitive. However, it can get difficult when the keycaps are off because normally these are so sensitive that sometimes pressing one of them down can actually trigger other ones. And that's just because they sympathetically vibrate. So the key, so when you have a key in here, it helps hold the plungers up, right, in this kind of up position. Without those in here, these normally are very sensitive. So sometimes you can press one key and it may falsely trigger multiple keys because these don't take very much to have them trigger. So I'm starting to put on the keycaps because having the keycaps will reduce that false positive, because if you see one key trigger multiple keys, that also could mean there's something messed up on the membrane. So we'll keep at this. I've got the F10 key in here now, and we'll put the rest of the keys on, except for the bad ones, and keep fiddling around with this and see where we go. As I'm doing this, there are two things that are really annoying. And is that these springs here, they are all clumped together, and sometimes they're hard to pull apart. I don't see how that could be avoided with shipping them in a bag. That's just how it is. But it still is obnoxious. But second is the keys were shipped on this nice tray here, this black tray. Now this is just a shipping artifact. But I'm finding it really difficult to remove the keys from this. Like, they're very stuck on there. The best I can do is take a screwdriver head like this that doesn't have really sharp edges on it, and use that to push them out. And then they come out easier. But I don't know. Maybe there's a trick to how to do this. If there is, I don't know it. Maybe somebody will tell me for my next time I do this. So I found with the screwdriver head that better fits that these just pop right out of there. So that's definitely the way to do it. So another thing that I've found is as I put in more keys that previously didn't seem to be working are now working fine. And this has happened to me every time that I've done this. And I don't know what the physical mechanism of it is, but it does seem like as you put more keys in that more keys start to work. Now the two that I took out that I knew were bad, that I explicitly placed here, are still not working. So that's expected. But the ones that were previously failing that were in the main set of plungers, they're now working again. So that's good news. We'll keep going on this and see if the good news continues. So for a product that doesn't have any instructions, it really is useful to have a working model to compare this to. So this comes with two sets of arrow keys, and they are slightly different. So I'm comparing them with my original arrow keys to try and figure out which is the right one. It may be difficult to tell, but these are both the same height. It's both right arrow keys. However, if I take this other one, it's pretty clear that one of these is taller than the other. So those must be for a different model keyboard than what I have. Additionally, for these little parts, which these slot into the back of longer keys so you can put the stabilization bars in there, there's actually two varieties of these. So I'm comparing these with the ones in my original keys and putting in the ones that match. So on these, I didn't have enough of the skinnier ones in my kit. So I had to harvest some out of my old keys, which is not a big deal, but kind of annoying. And come to find out, it does make a difference. I might double check the ones that I already did to see if maybe there's a set that I could have subbed out these thicker ones for. But most of the keys, like the tabs and the shifts, want these thinner ones. Otherwise, they don't press down all the way. These I've used in the inner key. They match the inner key. So we'll see. A little annoying, but no big deal. So for the space bar, the instructions indicated I needed to harvest my own stabilization bar from my old space bar. It did not mention, but I kind of assumed that I needed these two special springs. The space bar on this keyboard has 3 springs instead of just one like all the other keys. And also the little clips that hold the stabilization bar are different. So I went ahead and harvested those. I don't know if I actually needed to. I probably could have used one of the other ones, but I figured, well, I might as well since I'm harvesting parts anyhow. These things for the spacebar were all pretty much expected because it was made pretty clear on A1200.net's website. I am still a bit miffed that I didn't get enough of these thin ones and had to harvest some of those from my old keyboard. But, you know, like I say, it's really no big deal. Alright, so we've hit what I consider the first real problem here. So, this return key right now seems to work. Now, the reason it's working is that I've put in 3 out of the 4 clips. If I put in the 4th clip, I'm going to try and put this in on camera here. But see, there's something slightly different that causes friction here so that it doesn't come up. I'm not quite sure what that is yet. We'll investigate. Now here's the original key, and I know it's not the little clips because these are the clips that came with the kit. They're not the original one to the inner key. I swapped them around. So there's something slightly off with the inner key that's causing something here to rub. So for the moment, I've decided I'm going to quit working on these because I want to get these last two items working. So this one started working after I had all the keys in, so now it's just this one right here that's bad. So I'm going to swap these two and see if that behavior follows the plunger, and I might also try swapping out some spares that I have. So I've moved that bad plunger from the star key up here to the shift key, because I wanted to see if the behavior followed the plunger. And indeed it does. I can now hit the star key all the time, but if I hit the shift key, nothing. All the other keys now work, so there's definitely something wrong with this one plunger. And I'm going to pull out some spares that I have from other keyboard repairs to see if one of those spares will work. So I've looked at this guy, and he looks fine, but again, since the behavior follows him, he is likely the culprit. To replace this one, I got one of my spares out. Now you notice this spare is a different color. It's light green instead of white, with little blue accents here. And this is for later Mitsumi keyboards, but they should work in here too. These are slightly different though, but I believe that the differences are mostly around where the keycap attaches, not on the board side. So we'll see if this spare works. I know that spares work in the other direction. I can use this older kind of Mitsumi, the white ones, with newer keyboards which have the green ones. So we shall see. So putting these two things together is kind of tricky, especially because you want to be very careful not to damage the membrane. Now, I have most of my keycaps on, so it kind of makes sense to put this piece on top of that and then hold them together and flip it over. But if you don't have all of your keycaps attached, like I've got 1 and 2 that aren't attached here, then it makes sense to go the other way. And generally I hold it by these two edges here and gently flip it over. It's very hard to do on camera. Once you do that, there are little holes here that align with pieces in the plastic, so everything gets aligned nice and tight. So that didn't work, and I'm not sure if it's because I can't swap the green type and the white type on the same keyboard, or if my spare is bad. So I'm going to pull out a spare from my known working keyboard that I keep for spare parts and make sure it's a white type, and hopefully that'll be the end of this saga. So finally, I have all the keys working. Took a plunger out of my spare keyboard and put it in here, and we've now got all greens across the board, including the shift key, the return key. This is the shift key was the last place of the bad plunger before I finally took it out. So every key is working. They all respond correctly. It seems like every time I hit them all, they all hit right. So that's all I'm going to mess around with this board right now, because really I don't like messing with these membrane keyboards because they're so delicate. So we'll get back all the screws, reassemble it here, and carry on. Okay, so now I've got this acting a lot better. You can see it springs back pretty much immediately after I press it. Originally I was going to use sandpaper for this, but I decided to use a utility knife with a sharp new blade, and you can see the plastic filings off of here. And what I did was I just carved off the edge, so the edge on this side of these white clips. And I didn't remove that much material. Man, this is really having trouble focusing on this. I didn't remove that much material, but I removed enough so that now it can go up and down smoothly. So while I was messing around with the inner key, I went ahead and took all the other keys out, because I find that the keys with stabilization bars, and especially the inner key, are much easier to put in when all the other keys are out. So generally when I reassemble a keyboard like this, these keys are the ones that I start with, all the ones with stabilization bars. And now that the inner key seems to be working mostly okay, and we'll show that here using Amiga Test Kit. I think I'm going to get ready here and reinstall the rest of the keyboard. So now that I have all the keys working, I put all the screws back in, part of final assembly. The only thing I did not replace is the zip tie. I didn't have one small enough to fit in this hole, and I don't really think it's necessary, so we'll just leave it out for now. One thing I forgot to record was I did try to bend this back flat. It's mostly successful. Looks a little bit better now at least. And so here we have it back in the case. And this is how it looks with the top case put back on. And I think this is starting to look pretty good. So the only thing remaining is to get the floppy drive all set up for this, and then we can potentially close the case. So thank you for watching, and we'll pick this up next time.